People say old age makes you fragile, but I have learned it only makes you invisible. At 75, I still have a sharp mind, steady hands, and memories that stretch farther than the horizon. But to some people, none of that matters. They only see wrinkles, slow steps, and the inconvenience of a life that refuses to fade quietly. I never imagined I would spend my later years feeling like a guest, no, an intruder, in my own son's home. It wasn't always like this. When Daniel was born, I held him with a love so fierce it frightened me. Every fever, every scraped knee, every school project, I was there. His father, Arthur, worked long hours as a machinist, so most of the parenting fell on me. I didn't complain. Those were the best years of my life. Motherhood gave me purpose, direction, fire. But years have a cruel way of reshaping people. Daniel grew into a quiet, obedient boy, then a distant teenager, then a man shaped more by his ambitious wife than by the gentle values we had raised him with. Still, when Arthur passed away unexpectedly 2 years ago, Daniel's voice softened for the first time in years when he said, "Mom, come stay with us. You shouldn't live alone." Those words felt like a warm blanket placed on my shoulders. I sold my little apartment, packed my memories into boxes, and stepped into their home believing I was walking into a sanctuary. The first few weeks weren't terrible. Lila, my daughter-in-law, was polite in the way someone is polite to a stranger sitting beside them on a bus. Controlled, stiff, always aware of boundaries. She cooked meals without asking what I liked, spoke to me in clipped sentences, and kept her tone carefully neutral. I told myself it was simply an adjustment period. New routines, new rhythms, new people sharing one roof. But soon the air shifted. It started with missing items. My knitting bag moved to the garage. My reading glasses placed on a shelf I couldn't reach. My teapot replaced with a newer one I never asked for. When I finally mentioned it gently, Lila smiled without warmth. "Oh, I reorganize things. Makes the house feel fresh." I wanted to say it didn't feel fresh. It felt foreign. But I swallowed the words. At my age, peace is more valuable than pride. Daniel, meanwhile, grew quieter. He worked longer hours, came home more tired, and allowed Lila to dictate most things. He rarely asked about my day. When I spoke, sometimes he didn't even look up from his phone. I missed the boy who used to run to me with drawings, with laughter, with wide-eyed excitement about the world. Now he seemed to be drifting through life on autopilot. I tried helping around the house, folding laundry, washing dishes, sweeping the porch, but every time, Lila would appear like a shadow and say, "You don't need to do that. Just rest." Her words sounded caring, but her eyes said something else. "You're in the way." The house was full, yet I had never felt more alone. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone. She didn't know I was standing behind the half-open door. She's sweet but so slow. And forgetful. I can't have her touching everything. Slow. Forgetful? I remembered every word. Every tone. Every sting. I went to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the framed photo of Arthur smiling at me during our 40th anniversary. I pressed my fingers to the glass. "Arthur," I whispered. "I don't know if I belong here." The truth I didn't want to admit was this. I had traded my independence for company, but found neither. Yet I stayed. Because that's what mothers do. We endure. We hope. We wait for things to get better. But instead, the first cracks of betrayal had already begun forming. And soon, they would split my world open. It began with meals. I have cooked all my life. Soups that warmed winters, curries that filled the house with aroma, breads that rose like soft clouds. Cooking was my language of love. So naturally, I continued making small meals for myself in Daniel and Lila's kitchen. Nothing extravagant, just simple food that reminded me I was still me. One evening, I made a small bowl of vegetable soup. My knees hurt that day, but I stirred the pot slowly, the scent reminding me of Arthur humming at the table while reading his newspaper. I set my meal on the counter, went to wash my hands, and returned to find Lila wiping the counter aggressively. "Where's my soup?" I asked. "Oh, it looked old," she said dismissively. "I threw it out. I just made it." "Well, next time label your food so I know." She walked away before I could reply. The next day, she complained that I left too many crumbs on the dining table. even though I always cleaned up. Then she started commenting on my posture, my breathing, my footsteps. Things no one notices unless they want to find flaws. Daniel stayed silent through most of it. I don't know if he was blind to her behavior or simply chose not to see it. Both options hurt equally. Then came the day everything changed. It was a Thursday evening, unbearably quiet. I had spent most of the day in my room, organizing old letters, trying to stay out of the way. When my stomach growled, I decided to make a small dinner, just a little rice and lentils, the kind of meal that feels like home. As I cooked, I hummed a tune from my childhood. For a moment, I felt peaceful. When it was ready, I placed the food neatly on a plate, set it on the counter, and stepped into the bathroom to wash my hands before eating. It couldn't have been more than 60 seconds. When I came back, I froze. There they were, Lila and Daniel, standing over my plate like two mischievous children who had found a toy they didn't want. "What is this?" Lila laughed, poking the rice with the end of a spoon. "Smells like a retirement home," Daniel joked, a hint of mockery in his voice that I had never heard before. They shared a look, an ugly little spark of shared cruelty. Then, without hesitation, Lila lifted the plate and dropped it straight into the trash. The sound, the heavy thud of rice hitting waste, echoed louder than any scream. I felt my throat close. My hands trembled. "That was my dinner," I whispered. "Oh, relax," she said. "We're ordering pizza." "I didn't want pizza." "Well, then you should have said something." Daniel chuckled at that, as if this were a harmless joke. As if my dignity wasn't at the bottom of that trash can. I stood there, everything inside me collapsing in slow motion. Every sacrifice, every year of motherhood, every silent compromise. For the first time in my life, I felt truly unwanted. But beneath the grief, something else stirred. A quiet, steady anger I hadn't felt in decades. An anger forged by years of endurance. They didn't know it, but when they threw away that plate, they threw away the last bit of my patience. I didn't react. I didn't cry in front of them. I simply walked to my room, closed the door, and sat on my bed. My hands shook, but not from age, from betrayal. I looked at the old wooden box containing my financial papers, the house deed, the savings, the documents Arthur had left me. That night, as their laughter drifted down the hallway, I whispered to myself, "They think I'm powerless. They think I'm trapped." But I wasn't. I had more power than they could imagine. And soon, they would learn it the hard way. The night they threw my dinner away, I hardly slept. Not from sadness, though there was plenty of that, but from something sharper, clearer, almost electric. For months, I had convinced myself to endure, to ignore, to tolerate. But something changed inside me that night. The humiliation had carved open a part of me I thought old age had buried. The part that remembered who I used to be. I wasn't always fragile. I wasn't always quiet. I had been strong once. Brave. Capable. I had built a life with Arthur from nothing but determination and hope. I had raised a child, survived heartbreak, survived sickness, survived loss. I wasn't the frail shadow they believed me to be. That night, I pulled out a wooden box from under the bed. Inside were documents I hadn't touched since moving in, bank papers, insurance forms, and most importantly, the original deed to the house. My fingers grazed the embossed seal, my name written clearly beside Arthur's. My heart thumped with a mix of grief and clarity. "This house is mine." I whispered the words aloud, savoring the truth. Somehow, in the chaos of grief and loneliness, I had forgotten what power I still held. At dawn, I called my lawyer, Mr. Hargrave. He had known me since I was 32, had guided Arthur and me through every big decision. His voice, warm and steady, was a comfort I didn't know I needed. "Evelyn," he greeted. "Is everything all right?" "No. Iraplia. And that's why I need your help." I told him everything, every humiliation, every degrading remark, every moment that chipped away at my dignity. He listened in silence, the kind of silence that told me he understood the weight behind my words. When I finished, he said, his voice firm, "You don't have to tolerate that. We'll resolve this." "How?" I asked. "You are the legal owner of the house. If you want them out, you can initiate a formal eviction." The word hit me like a jolt. Eviction. Such a cold, decisive word. But then again, no colder than the way they treated me. I want to do it, I said. I've made up my mind. Then come by tomorrow morning. We'll prepare everything. For the first time in months, I stood taller. My spine straightened. My breath felt fuller. I wasn't hiding anymore. The next morning, I dressed in my nicest sweater, the blue one Arthur liked, and walked into the lawyer's office with my head high. The secretary gave me a warm smile, and for a moment I felt seen again. Inside, Mr. Hargrave laid out the paperwork on his polished wooden desk. Each page was crisp, official, silently powerful. He explained every detail, the legal rights, the notice period, the process. But I already knew. I understood more than they ever gave me credit for. With a steady hand, I signed each document. My signature trembled slightly, not out of fear but from the weight of reclaiming my life. When the final page was signed, Mr. Hargrave leaned back. "You're doing the right thing," he said softly. "Your safety and dignity come before anything else." As I walked out with the white envelope in my purse, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. This wasn't the ending I imagined for my motherhood. I had wanted to spend my later years surrounded by warmth, not preparing eviction papers against the child I raised. But some endings are chosen for us by the very people we love. That evening, I behaved normally, quiet, polite, invisible, just as they preferred. They had no idea that the envelope sitting on my bedside table would change their lives forever. Over the next few days, I prepared quietly. I cleaned my room, organized my belongings, and made a list of people I might call once the house was mine again. Friends, neighbors, perhaps even a part-time caregiver. I allowed myself to dream again, small dreams of peace and comfort. Every time I heard their laughter echo down the hallway, I didn't flinch. I didn't crumble. I didn't cry. Instead, I held on to the envelope. My justice. My freedom. My voice. The plan was set. The moment was approaching. And they would never see it coming. The morning of my long-awaited victory dawned quietly, the kind of soft light that makes everything in a house seem golden, almost forgiving. I made myself a small breakfast, tea and toast lightly buttered, and set it on the counter, just as I had countless times before. But this time there was a difference. I was calm, centered, and patient. The envelope rested in my sweater pocket, heavy with truth, ready to undo years of disrespect. As I finished my tea, I heard their usual footsteps approaching, the ones I had come to dread. Lila's high heels clicked against the hardwood. Daniel's sneakers squeaked softly, the sounds of oblivious cruelty. I didn't flinch. I didn't hide. I simply waited, letting the moment unfold exactly as it should. And then the inevitable happened. Lila spotted the plate I had left on the counter. Her nose wrinkled in that familiar way, the expression that had haunted me for months. "Why is there food here? Who made this?" she demanded, already reaching for it with that same casual disdain. Daniel chuckled behind her, eyes darting between the plate and me, the same silent mocking tone that had reduced me to tears countless times before. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Lila lifted the plate and thud. The sound of rice hitting the trash can reverberated through the kitchen. I felt a pang of old anger, sharp as a knife, cut through my chest, but I didn't move. I waited. Lila turned to me, smirking. "Relax, Mom. It's just dinner. I'll order something for you." I met her gaze and smiled. Not a kind, forgiving smile, but one that carried the weight of every insult, every humiliation, every moment they had made me feel worthless. Slowly, I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out the envelope. "What's that?" Lila asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. "Read it," I said. Confusion crossed Daniel's face. Lila opened the envelope and began reading, her eyes scanning the neatly typed words. At first, her expression froze in disbelief. Then came the realization. And then the fear. "You can't, this isn't possible," Daniel stammered. His voice cracked, betraying panic he had never shown before. "I am the legal owner of this house," I said softly, deliberately. "You have 30 days to vacate. After that, legal action will proceed." They stared at me, mouths open, eyes wide. Lila's face turned pale. Daniel's hands shook. They grasped for words, for excuses, for pleading, but I had endured their cruelty too long. There was nothing they could say, no apology that could reverse months of mockery and years of disrespect. You tossed away my dignity, I continued, my voice steady. You mocked my meals, my presence, my age. Tonight, when you threw away my dinner, you tossed away the last chance I gave you to treat me as family. They stumbled backward, a mix of panic and anger clouding their faces. They shouted, they begged, they tried to accuse me of overreacting. But I had risen above their pettiness, their arrogance, their ignorance. I was no longer the quiet, powerless woman they had underestimated. Over the next 28 days, they packed their things. Every shout, every insult, every tear they hurled in anger was met with my calm silence. I watched as the house, my sanctuary, slowly returned to me. Not just the walls or furniture, but the air, the space, the dignity they had stolen. Once they left, I walked through the house slowly, touching familiar surfaces, breathing deeply, finally feeling the relief of ownership. Not just legally, but emotionally. I hired a part-time nurse, restored my garden, reopened my books, and invited neighbors for tea. I reconnected with friends I had lost touch with, traveled to places I had longed to see, and rebuilt a life that belonged to me entirely. And each evening, when the sun painted the walls gold, I whispered the lesson I had learned. Never underestimate a woman who has been silent for too long. Revenge is not about anger. It's about reclaiming yourself. And finally, after 75 years of learning, loving, and enduring, I had done just that.